Hi there folks. This is a somewhat out of the ordinary video for me because I don't normally reply directly to discussions by means of a video, but it seemed like the most appropriate way to do it in this case. And recently one of my fellow YouTubers, Log Cabin Looms, uploaded a video about sizing dies and he called them vent holes that are in sizing dies. And I kind of disagree with him, and I'll explain why I disagree with what he has to say, and hopefully it comes off in a respectful fashion, because I really enjoy his channel, and if you're not subscribed to his channel, you really ought to go check him out, because he's an interesting guy, and he's got a lot of cool stuff to show you. Anyway, we had some discussion this winter, Gun Geek and I, about a comment that Log Cabin Looms made about sizing dies, and he commented that in cold weather, this hole in the sizing die was getting plugged up, and he was getting dented cases. And his explanation for the dented cases was that air was not being allowed to escape from that vent hole, and that compressed air was causing a dent in the case. Now, it sounds okay on first examination until you look at some other brands of dies which do not have a vent hole like this one. This is an older Pacific Durachrome die. Actually, this is sort of the ancestor to this die. This is a Hornady die, a 308 full-length sizing die, and it has this bleed hole, which he called a vent hole. And the older die, this Pacific Durachrome, as you can see, I'll turn it around, do a full 360 of it there. There is no bleed hole in this older die. Now, the purpose of the bleed hole is not to let compressed air out, it's to let excessive lubricant out. Now, this old die, this is in 35 Remington, and I can show you some cartridges that I loaded with using this die. I loaded them actually yesterday. Here's one as an example, and despite the lack of that hole, you will notice if I turn this cartridge around that there are no dents in the shoulder or anything like that, and that's because I didn't use an excessive amount of case lube. Now, the problem with denting is because case lube is incompressible, and if you get a buildup of it in the die, it will not compress. It's a hydraulic item, and it won't compress, and as a result it has nowhere to go if there's too much of it. Especially if it's cold, it won't flow, and as a result you'll usually get dents in the shoulder with too much case lube. So it's best to avoid excessive amounts of case lube. The problem is worse with colder weather because the viscosity of the case lube is reduced and it doesn't flow as well. Now, this being an older die, probably about 35 years old or so, doesn't have a vent feature, but the reloading companies learned over time that a lot of people use too much case lube or too thick a case lube, and they alleviated some of the problems caused by that by putting a bleed hole in the die, usually up at the shoulder area, and that way if there's any excessive case lube, the lube has a place to go. It'll flow out that hole. Now, the problem with thinking that this is compressed air causing the issue is that there's very little compressed or very little air to be compressed in a cartridge when it's sized. If you can visualize the cartridge here going into the die, it goes in with pretty much no resistance at all until it gets to there. So when you shove it into the die, the shell holder is going to come up to about this point in time. So basically you are probably forcing it into the case, or forcing it into the die, probably about 1/4 of an inch thereabouts in this case. And so there would be a little bit of air trapped between the neck of the cartridge and the body, but the bulk of it is going to squeeze out past the top of the die around the threads here. And in the case of the modern style die, you've still got threads and you've got a collet, so there's some space for that to vent air, because you don't need very much room to vent air. You need a lot more room to vent a thick fluid like case lube. So ultimately there really isn't very much air to be compressed in there, and even if it was all captured, it is compressible, unlike the hydraulically incompressible case lube. and there just isn't enough air in there captured to cause a dent. So basically the reason why there are vent holes on these is convenience for the consumer. The reloading companies probably got excuse me, complaints when they had this style of die. People used too much case lube, or they used you know, their equipment in cold weather, and they got dents from the case lube. When they introduced the style of die with a bleed hole, the excess case lube had somewhere to go. It squirted out the side, and the problem went away of case dents. It's pretty easy to replicate if you want to get dents in a case, especially with this older style of die that doesn't have a bleed hole. If you put a big pile of case lube on these, or you size in cold weather, you can get dents without too much problem. But if you're kind of easy on the amount of sizing lube you use, or if you use a thinner lube or a wax, you won't have that much of a problem. But this definitely is an improvement to have the hole there, because you can go a little overboard with the case lube and not suffer any unsightly dents to your cases. The dents aren't really much of a problem as far as functionality goes. They're more of a cosmetic thing. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on the whole matter. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later.